With me now, back to childcare, is Annabel Denham, previously at the Institute of Economic Affairs and writing reports on women in work as well. Good stuff, Annabel. And Ryan Shorthouse as well, Chief Executive at Bright Blue. Right, OK, Annabel, I will start with you. How do you feel about this childcare stuff? Does it go far enough?
I think that there are some good things that the government announced today. For instance, increasing the subsidy towards the 33 hours and the 15 free hours for children over the age of 3. A big problem that we've had until now is that the government has paid a standard rate across the country for those so-called free hours, but it's been below the market rate in some areas, and that has forced nurseries to cross-subsidise with children under the age of 3 or children who require wraparound care, which has made costs exorbitant for those parents. So I think if you're going to give a subsidy for children aged 3 and over, then it's good that the government is at least going to be paying what nurseries need in order to stay above water. The other positive is that they've loosened teacher-to-child ratios. Now, for all the cries that this is some massive deregulation of childcare, it isn't. We're going from 1 to 4 to 1 to 5, bringing it in line with Scotland. Let's not forget that some countries in Europe, like Denmark and Germany, don't have any teacher-to-child ratios at all. They actually allow individual providers to decide what is in the best needs of the children in their care, which is entirely sensible. They know far better than Whitehall bureaucrats. So that's the good stuff. But the bad stuff is that what we're seeing is the government moving far closer towards total nationalisation of childcare. Obviously, we now have the subsidy going for children aged 9 months and over. That's actually before statutory maternity leave comes to an end at 52 weeks. And the state essentially taking on the role of parent and this assumption that it can parent our children better than we can. So that I'm opposed to.
Well, it's interesting that you raise that point. Now, Ryan, I'm going to hit you with an early contender for most controversial email of the day, and it's come through from Kim, OK? Now, Kim says, women need to stay at home and do their job to bring children up to at least the age of 11. They are getting childcare out of our taxpayers' money to earn more money. It's a joke. If women stayed at home, more men could work, and that's a good thing. I'm assuming you don't agree with Kim.
Well, I think what's important is that people are given choice. Women and men decide what's in their best interest to looking after their children, particularly when they're very young. But there's lots of evidence to suggest that the childcare costs are putting off, particularly women, from entering the labour market. And today's announcements, you know, as you said earlier in the show, it was very much a kind of steady as she goes sort of budget. But actually, the childcare announcements were very solid and very bold and quite considerable. And, you know, I think you have to take into account that improving childcare affordability in this country, and childcare, the costs are so crippling and uniquely expensive in this country, that sorting it is good for economic growth, gets more people back in the labour market. It's good for long-term prosperity. There's lots of evidence that kids, particularly from deprived backgrounds, who access high-quality formal childcare have better education in the long term. But it's also good for family formation and relationship stability. There's lots of evidence that millennials, my generation, fewer of them are having children because it costs so much to raise a family, and particularly to pay for childcare. So I think today's announcements are broadly very positive. I don't agree that it's a nationalisation of childcare, because
that's what I want to go back on. That's what
just to say, about 80% of the market.
Yeah, OK, well, Annabel, just on that, let me go to Annabel because we're running out of time. Annabel, I want to come back on that. So what is your idea about it being the nationalisation of childcare? And if it does mean that women can go back to work, we can get economic growth, we might be able to get proper, decent population growth as well, what's the problem with that?
Well, first I'd say that there are other ways of bringing down the costs of childcare that don't involve a massive government subsidy that's going to cost around £10 billion a year. From now on, we could deregulate further, particularly making it easier for people to become childminders, making it easier for family members to look after your children. And you could also give vouchers to parents. You know, generally my view is that people are much happier when they're given money or allowed to keep more of their own money than they are by the government giving them stuff that they may or may not use. The subsidy itself, actually, an existing subsidy, is one for mostly middle-class families, if you look at the uptake. And when it comes to female female labour market participation, there's very limited evidence to suggest that this increasing childcare affordability and accessibility has a measurable impact on the number of women who are going back to work. So I think we should take that with a dose of scepticism, but also just be asking why the government is so keen to take very young children away from their parents from such a young age and for such long periods of time. I think it needs a fundamental rethink of why it's involved in childcare at all and what its objectives are and how it's going to measure them.
All right, look, Ryan, can I offer you my sincere apologies for a deeply unbalanced interview here, because I have now catastrophically run out of time, which is my fault entirely. But Ryan, thank you very much for turning up nonetheless. It was Ryan Shorthouse, our Chief Executive of Bright Blue. Well, I'm not surprised, yeah. And Annabelle Denham as well, who is previously of the Institute of Economic Affairs and writes reports on women in work. There we go. I think maybe in keeping with the tone of that interview, it was correct that the lady present spoke for longer. Anyway.